very warm welcome to everybody to today's Durham Energy Institute seminar, and a very warm welcome to Faisal, who we are very much looking forward to hearing from. So we know Faisal from way back because he took the MSc in New and Renewable Energy here. And now he is working at the Ministry of Energy in Pakistan as a Director of Projects at PPPB. So I'm going to hand over to Faisal. Let me just say that if you have questions during the talk, please do pop them in the chat, and we'll have an open session at the end after, if Faisal talks for about 40 minutes or so, we'll have time for questions afterwards as well. Just so that you know, the webinar is being recorded so that we can share it with other colleagues later. Okay, over to you, Faisal.
Thank you, Professor Simon, for the introduction. And I am really grateful to Dr. Professor John and Durham Energy Institute for providing me this opportunity to deliver my first ever Durham Energy Institute Associate Fellow webinar as a part of this hybrid event series. And it's indeed a pleasure to speak to Durham vibrant community. Thank you everyone for being here, and a very good afternoon. Let me share my screen of PowerPoint slides. So is it visible to everyone?
Yes, that's good.
Okay. So my today's webinar is on clean energy and actually market transformation in Pakistan as challenges and way forward. So is it moving? We are on the next slide.
Yes.
I just want to confirm.
Fine. Yeah.
Okay, moving fine. So that is just an outline of my presentation. Initially, I'll discuss what the clean energy transition is basically, what's its importance, and then how energy and environment are closely interlinked. And then we'll move towards United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and overall global overview of clean energy transitions, how it's going on in the world, and how Pakistan is taking up this clean energy and market transformation in its electricity market and energy sector. And then what challenges we are facing, and what kind of possible way forwards we are working to cope up with these challenges. And then we will conclude the presentation with certain key takeaways. So what is clean energy transition and how it's important? Basically, the clean energy transition is, of course, moving away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy, towards clean and green energy, in order to reduce the carbon emissions. And why it's urgent, why it's crucial, because the Paris Agreement has set the target to reach carbon net zero by 2050, and to maintain the temperature of 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial level. So in the next slides, we will see that why energy sector is important to achieve net zero carbon emissions and how it's contribute in the climate change and global warming. So overall, if that is the data from World Index and Energy Resource, and that was published in 2016, but that is very much similar to as the current situation is. So we can see that the greenhouse gases are very closely interlinked with the climate change, and the climate basically, and the energy is the largest contribution in the GHG emissions. So overall, world energy emits 73.2% of the GHG emissions. So it makes it most crucial and most important end use commodity to reach net zero. So in order to achieve the net zero, in order to move towards clean and green future, the transition of energy from fossil fuel towards renewable energy and green energy is very crucial, because energy is a major contributor which is polluting the environment and overall contributing in the global warming. So 73% of the global emissions are coming from the energy sectors. So the renewable energy and energy efficiency that are very important to achieve the climate targets set by under the Paris agreements and overall SDG 7. So this is again a countrywide depiction of the global emissions. We can see that out of 50 billion ton of GHG emissions, that 5 countries emits half of these emissions, that is around 25 billion tons. So these countries are the major contributor, major emitters of the GHG emissions. So when we talk about the carbon emissions and then we talk about the future targets, so we have to look at where is the major chunk which can be, which need to be, actions need to be taken upon to reduce these emissions, and what are the major focus areas. So these 5 major emitters emits almost 50% of the global GHG emissions. And of course, these GHG emissions and these carbon emissions support their industrial development and economic development, because the activities related to industrial and economic development requires the use of energy, and that emits carbon emissions and the global and the GHG emissions. So that is very important to understand that from where the major chunk of GHG emissions are coming from globally. So the United Nations General Assembly in 2015 set an interlinked 17 goals to achieve better and sustainable future for all by 2030. So these all goals are interlinked, and these are targeted to be achieved by 2030. So because the topic is the clean energy transition, so we will have more focus on United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 7, because it's about to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all by 2030. However, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal Report 21 shows that around 759 million people lack access to electricity. So they don't have electricity access, and then almost 1/3 of the population, which is I think 2.6 billion people, rely on the inefficient and dangerous cooking techniques. So in order to achieve these targets, the pace of renewable energy deployment and the level of energy efficiency are the 2 major parameters which need to be enhanced to achieve these targets. So clean energy transition. Overall, if we look in the global perspective, clean energy transition have put some serious challenges for the policymakers, because on the one hand, to balance the economic growth, you need energy, but on the other hand, you have to supply that energy with the less carbon emissions. So though apparently these 2 targets are in contradictory in nature, but of course, actually it's not like that. So when you need economic development, when you need an industrial revolution, you need the energy. But on the other hand, under the Paris Agreement, you have to maintain certain temperature level and to achieve net zero by 2050. So that means that the world economies have to produce energy from the low carbon energy sources to maintain the carbon emissions within the control limits, and to further reduce it gradually in the coming years to achieve the targets. So overall energy use has almost 75% share in the global GHG emissions. So that is a major contribution from a single sector. It's the largest contributor in the global greenhouse gas emissions. So there are multifaceted challenges being faced by the policymakers and the decision makers, that how they can balance the economic growth while moving towards low carbon economy, while moving towards low carbon energy sources. So overall, a very cost-effective decarbonization is required for electrification, because to achieve the target, the world need to maximize electrification of all the sectors, including heating and transportation. But that electricity should come from the renewable energy sources, not from the fossil fuels. Because otherwise, if you use a fossil fuel for heating, or you use fossil fuel for transportation, so that will again indirectly contribute into the carbon emissions and the GHG emissions. But these like heating and cooling sector is around 50% of total end use energy consumption. So that is the most important sector which need to be decarbonized. So how you can decarbonize? Of course, you cannot use direct renewable wind for the transportation, but of course you can use electricity. You can design electricity vehicles. You can use renewable energy based electricity for the heating and cooling of the buildings. So all these are very important steps to achieve the overall clean energy transitions and Sustainable Development Goal 7 in line with the climate actions. So our research shows that around 2/3 of the world electricity is still based on the fossil fuels. So that means that achieving NZE requires that has been again from a research paper that almost 80% of electricity should be decarbonized to achieve the net zero emissions target by 2050. Under that perspective, the renewable energy and energy efficiency that will have a potentially achieve 90% of the required target. So we can see that how the renewable energy and energy efficiency are two important pillars for the clean energy transition. So since I'll be discussing a Pakistani case, that how Pakistan is taking up this clean energy transitions and how we are moving towards clean and green energy from fossil fuel based power generation system. So I would like to provide some key facts to the audience about the country. It's about 800,000 kilometers square of area with 215 million populants. Located in the South Asia. It's a lower mid-income country with around $1550 per capita. The energy supplies for 2020 was 81 million ton of oil equivalent, whereas the final consumption was 52. We meet our energy requirements 55% from the indigenous resources and 45% from the imports. So that numbers are the primary energy numbers. And then when we move towards the electricity sector, so currently we have around 40 gigawatts of installed power generation capacity. And during year 2021, 131 terawatt hours was the electricity production for the country. 75% of population have access to electricity as of today. The per capita electricity consumption is not very high. It's low, around 500, 550. So that is a low per capita electricity consumption. But the positive side is that the country has blessed with abundant renewable energy resources. We have a hydro potential of 60 gigawatts, wind 340, and very strong solar radiations. We have a potential around 2,900 gigawatts. So these are the indigenous. Further, we have also indigenous coal, but that is of course not a topic for today. That is again 1 billion tons of coal reserves, which can produce electricity for the future for hundreds of years. But obviously, we are moving away from fossil fuels and prioritizing to develop the renewable and clean energy sources. This is a typical flow diagram of Pakistan electricity sector. So the country have generation source from different sources, from hydel, from nuclear, and then in private sector from fossil fuels based IPPs and also some renewable projects. And then that generated electricity is transmitted through high voltage transmission line, 500 kV to 20 kV. And finally, the distribution companies, which are the interface of the sector with the end consumers, they supply deliver electricity to the end consumer. So the consumers are all kind of consumer, whether domestic, commercial, industrial. Recently, private sector transmission line of around 900 kilometer HVDC transmission line have been added in the system. So that is first ever HVDC transmission line in the country. So now we can say that we have both topology in Pakistan, the HVDC as well as HVAC. So that is a new addition to private sector and in the HVDC technology. And we have future plans to induct more high voltage AC and high voltage DC transmission line through private sector investment. The Pakistan's energy mix for 2021, so around 39-40 gigawatts of capacity, and we have as of today the country is dependent mainly on thermal fuels, even with major share of imported fuels like RLNG, coal, and we have 62% overall share of thermal fuels, including imported coal, gas, and oil. And then we have followed by 26% share of hydropower and around 5% share of VRE, variable renewable energy like wind and solar, and 7% nuclear. So this is the current energy mix. And then in the coming slides, we will see that how we are planning to move away from these thermal fuel based generation towards renewable energy. What are the targets and how we will achieve those targets through various policies and various national plans which are being formulated to achieve those targets. So, in fact, Pakistan have set targets of 60% share of renewable energy by 2030. So that 60% includes almost 39% of hydro and 22% of VREs. So overall, these are very well aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals 7 and Paris Agreements and the international climate commitments under the Paris Agreements. Overall, country has less than 1% share of GHG emissions in global basket. Per capita emissions is very low, 2.07 ton of CO2 equivalent, and an energy sector of the country accounts half of the GHG emissions, whereas 90% of the carbon emissions. Further, not only we are moving away from fossil fuel towards the clean energy, but we are also transforming the electricity markets. In fact, we are entering at a time two transitions. The one is a clean energy transition, the other is electricity market transformation, because the Pakistan power sector is currently being transformed from current single buyer model towards multiple wholesale market model, and the commercial operation of the market is expected by April 2022. So these transitions obviously are challenging for even for the developed countries, but it's more challenging for a developing country like Pakistan, because we have a number of macroeconomic issues, market compatibility, grid infrastructure, policy, technical, regulatory level issues. So all these issues, all these issues make these transitions more complex for a developing country like Pakistan. But we have some plans and we have some policies to cope up with these challenges. Reforms in Pakistan electricity sector was in fact started in early 90s. Like earlier, if we go back in the history, we had two vertical integrated utilities. So one was a Water and Power Development Authority, WAPDA, and other was Karachi Electric Supply Corporation. So WAPDA was responsible to generate, transmit, and supply electricity in the whole country, except the metropolitan city of Karachi, which is the largest city of the country, which was supplied by the KESC. But later on, under WAPDA Strategic Plan 1992, the WAPDA was unbundled in transmission, distribution, and generation companies. And as part of these reforms, PPIB, which is my current institution, a private power board, was created in 94 to promote, encourage and safeguard private sector investment, because the market was going to be liberalized. So we need a private sector participation to invest in the generation segment of the electricity sector. So PPIB as a one window facility was created. And during that time, regulatory regime was also introduced, and National Electric Power Regulatory Authority was set up to oversee this rebundling process and to regulate the unbundled entities, which were in fact monopolistic monopolies in their areas, like the distribution companies and the transmission. So these all are natural monopolies in the electricity sector. So ultimate objective of these reforms was to liberalize the market, to bring efficiency, improve competition, and transparency in the electricity sector. So currently, at the moment, we have not completed these reforms. In fact, the unbundling of WAPDA was completed in early 2000, but then again, we stuck in the same at the same stage, and we could not move further due to some economic and political issues. And so currently, we are operating on a single buyer model. So first we will discuss the role of PPIB, then we will move towards the market transformation, that how now we are moving ahead from the current situation. So it was PPIB is created as a one-stop organization of Government of Pakistan to facilitate investor to set up power projects in the private sector. So we execute, we monitor those projects, we process those projects, we approve those projects, provide them government guarantees on behalf of Government of Pakistan, and sign implementation agreements, providing certain assurances and risk coverages from being a government entity on behalf of Government of Pakistan, and also provide them guarantee against the power purchase repayment obligations. So far, it has facilitated number of policies, including 94, 95, 2002 to 2015 generation policies and transmission policy. So all these policies were formulated and implemented by the institution, and under these policies, leading world investors and lenders and technical companies participated in the power sector and supported the overall development of the country's economic growth. So far, we have developed 40 independent power producers, around 18,000 megawatts. So that 18,000 megawatts in the installed capacity, that these IPPs have 50% shares, but sometime in the electricity generation, these are up to 70% share, because these are the efficient plants as compared to the public sector plants, which are relatively old gencos and have low efficiency and other reliability issues. So in electricity generation, most of the time in a year, they are contributing up to 70%, even sometimes beyond 70% of total generation. Besides IPPs, we, as I mentioned in my earlier slides, that we also inducted one HVDC transmission line projects for private sector participation. These projects has been inducted under China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is a flagship projects framework between Pakistan, government of China and government of Pakistan, under which more than 13,000 megawatts projects, power projects and transmission line projects were agreed to be developed through their private investors. And the major chunk of those projects have been again processed by PPPB. Currently, besides the commissioned and operational projects, we are managing portfolio of 22 new power producers projects of more than 12,000 megawatts. So these the major share out of 22, around 15 projects are hydropower projects. So you can see that again that the focus is on the clean and green energy. So that is 51% share. So now we move to back a little bit towards the historic setup of Pakistan power sector. As I earlier mentioned, that there were two vertically integrated. This is just a VIU model, that how VIU model operates, that a vertically integrated utility operates the generators, the transmitters, and the distribution company. So WAPDA and KSC both were the VIUs. So they own all the value chain of the electricity, and they generate, transmit, and distribute electricity to the end consumer. But later on, due to inefficiency issues and some other issues, it was decided to unbundle the WAPDA basically. So it was unbundled in generation, transmission, distribution companies, and we move towards a single buyer model, where a central power purchasing agency signs a power purchase agreement with the independent power producers and GENCOs at a price, and under that agreement, these GENCOs supply electricity, sell electricity to the central power purchasing agency, and this central power purchasing agency basically is purchasing power on behalf of all the distribution companies. So finally, the distribution companies, the single buyer sells electricity to those discos at a pool price, plus they own some wheeling charges, which is a distribution network charges. So currently we are on single buyer model. Previously vertical integrated, currently on single buyer, and now we are moving away from single buyer towards a multiple buyer model, where there will be a multiple buyer. A generator can sell electricity in the market, we're having option of multiple buyer models. Right now, the generator does not have the options. In fact, he has long-term agreements with the single buyer. So so the generator has bound to sell electricity to the single buyer. But in the future, there will be option. There will be more buyers, and it will be a more organized market. But of course, at the consumer end, in the beginning, there will be not much option. Only a few consumer having electricity consumption beyond certain level, like a threshold of 1 megawatt, they can choose to have a supplier other than the last resort or discos. They can get supply from the other market or competitive suppliers. Rest of the consumer will be regulated consumer, and they'll be getting supply from these discos, which are public sector owned companies. So the future market is a competitive trading bilateral contract market, which was government approved the model in 2015 after a gap of many years. So again, some reform started in 2015. The model was approved. That later on, the Central Power Purchasing Agency prepared a design that was approved by the regulator NEPRA in 2019, and now the detailed design has already been approved. And under that detailed design, the commercial operation of the market is expected during the next year. And so these days we are working on number of tasks and number of actions which are to be completed before the commercial to start the commercial operation of the market. In fact, it's a transition from single power model towards multi-power models, and with following characteristics, like there'll be two products, energy and capacity, which will be traded in the markets with some balancing mechanism for energy and capacity. And then these contracts will be a bilateral contracts between DISCOs and generators, and it will cover the volatility of generation prices. Further, a certain mechanism will be there to for the allocation of transmission and distribution losses. So this will be a multiple buyer market with a certain options and more market players in the future markets to bring competition, improve efficiency, and to enhance the capital formation in the electricity sector. That is again for the financial sustainability, overall financial sustainability in the electricity delivery services, because right now there's huge financial sustainability issues in overall electricity supply chain, the circular debt issues and other financial and technical losses. So these reforms hopefully will be to improve the overall efficiency of the electricity sector. So there will be two kinds of key players in the CTBCM. The first one, the market service providers. So these service providers will have no commercial interest in the market. They'll provide a level playing field to all the market participants to improve overall competition and transparency. So these will not have commercial interest, but they're providing an equal and level playing field to the market participant. And market participant will be those players who will have the commercial interest, will involve in direct buying and selling of the market products like energy and capacity. So they'll have a commercial interest. So who will be the market service provider? So market service provider, the market operator, of course, the market operator will organize and administrate overall markets and the payment schedule amongst the market participants. Then the system operator responsible for dispatch and transmission system administration. Then metering service providers, entities which will be responsible for metering services, and transmission service provider will overall operating the transmission network operation. And then at distribution level, the distribution companies getting supply from the generators and then supplying to the end consumers. So initially the distribution companies will also be working as a supplier of last resort, because in the developed markets like the UK, the European Union or the US, the distribution, sometimes they are only responsible to operate the distribution network. But in Pakistan, initially, these distribution companies will also be responsible to supply electricity to the end consumer. They'll not only be a distribution network operator, but the supplier of last resort for the regulated consumer. Yes, as I mentioned, that there'll be option for the end consumer that they can get electricity from competitive supplier, other supplier in the market, but there'll be a certain benchmark, like the option will not be available for all the consumer, but for those consumer which are called bulk power consumer having consumption more than 1 megawatt. And then there'll be an independent auction administrator. So that role will be given to the current PPIB, that the independent auction administrator will procure new power generation capacity for DISCOs, induct new power plants through competitive auctions, through a competitive auction process. So it will involve in the procurement planning for the distribution companies, and also arrange government guarantees for the financially weak DISCOs, because the DISCOs which is not strong on its balance sheet, they require a government guarantee. Otherwise, no generator, no investor will sign a bilateral contract with the weak DISCOs when there'll be an issue with the payment of the disbursements of the payments and the revenues. So IEAA, independent auction, will also provide guarantee to weak DISCOs. Market participants. So these are the market part, because these have the commercial interest in the market. They'll actually involve in the trading of products like the energy, the capacity. So generators of course, the generation companies, the power plants, they'll be generating electricity and they'll be supplying electricity to the distribution companies and other suppliers. Then bulk power consumer, like some consumer who have capacities above certain megawatt consumption requirements, so they can have option to purchase directly from the market from the competitive suppliers. So suppliers, there'll be two kind of supplier. One, the competitive suppliers, and the other is last resort supplier is the existing distribution companies who will be supplying electricity to the majority of the consumers, the regulated consumer. Then there'll be traders who will be involved in the buying and selling of the electricity. So these are the market participants in the start of the market. So in the start of the market, it's not very much different from the existing model, other than that it should be a bilateral contracts, because of course, in the developed markets, there's a spot market, the day-ahead market, and then the retail competition at a retail level. But initially, the competition will only be at the wholesale in the wholesale market level. So there's no retail market in the start, and there's no much room available for the end consumer to select its suppliers like in other developed markets. But with the passage of time, obviously there will be evolution, and more and more feature will be introduced to bring more competition in the market. So now we can see that what is the future demand of the country and how the demand is increasing. Like by 2030, our NTDC, which is a National Transmission and Dispatch Company, a Nation Grid Company, in fact, it's responsible to formulate an indicative generation capacity expansion plan for the 10 years. So in the latest 10 years plan, 21 to 2030, they have projected the base case scenario on a growth rate of 3.9 to 5.7%, and the generation capacity to meet the peak demand of 37 gigawatt by 2030. The generation capacity is required to be 61 gigawatts by during next 10 years. And the generation which was in 2021 around 131 terawatt hours will be 207.418 gigawatt hour during by 2030. So generation we require more generation, and then to meet the peak demand, and accordingly the generation capacity number will be increased from 40 gigawatts to 61 gigawatts. And then a huge investment, around $40 billion investment is required for the new power generation capacity. This is beside the capacity payments of and capital expenditure of the committed projects just for the new projects. If we look at the Pakistan per capita GHG emissions, again, it's a very lowest in the region, and very lower number as compared to development. In fact, multiple times lower, not only from the developing countries like US, Russia, but also from the neighboring countries like India and even China, Turkey. So 2.07 overall total per capita GHG emissions. And if we look at energy related number, that is again less than 1.99. So a very low GHG emissions overall, very low contribution in overall total GHG emissions were around 438 for this is our number for 2019. So this is but energy sector is accounting for almost half of these emissions, followed by agriculture, and then industry almost 6%. So this is overall a breakup of the total GHG emissions. Carbon emissions are even further lower, 1.01, much lower than multiple times lower than the other countries. So because the reason is that Pakistan has just 12% share of coal in its power in overall installed electricity capacity, and these plants are again being operated in strict compliance with the international environmental standards. So very low share of coal, and that's why we have a lower number of per capita carbon emission, lower per capita. Despite the fact that Pakistan has much lower carbon emissions, carbon footprints, the current administration have shown very strong commitment towards clean and green energy policies, well aligned with the United Nations SDG 7 and Paris agreements. So they have announced a number of policies and plans. The overarching policy, National Energy Policy 21, has been recently introduced, has been announced, and it has a very strong focus. In fact, it envisioned a very stable, very financially sustainable power system in line with the international climate goals. And the focus is on environment and indigenization. So it's have 6 key guiding principles, which revolves around and to improve the efficiency, transparency, bring competition, the financial viability within the electricity value chain, and indigenization, and then environment responsibility. Recently, at the eve of COP26, the Ministry of Climate Change has updated its national determined contribution and report. And according to that report, the country has targeted to reduce 50% of its projected emission by 2030. Of course, 15% of these 50% reduction can be achieved through the country's own resources, but for 35%. It requires an international grant from multilaterals, and then to achieve these targets, we have already set a target of 60% of renewables by 2030, 30% of electricity vehicles share by 2030. A 10 billion pre-Sami projects, which are flagship projects of Prime Minister, has been launched. Further, the country is already working on market and non-market based solution, mobilizing private sector investments to invest in the clean and green energy and clean and green technologies to share these to achieve these targets. And of course, we will require a technical and capacity building policy level support from various multilaterals and from developed countries. By 2030, if we look at 2030 fuel mix, so that is entirely different from the 2021. Here we have around a 61% share of clean energy, like 39 hydro and 22% of solar and wind, and then nuclear. So almost 67% clean energy, low carbon share. And if we talk in terms of indigenous resources, because we have local coal and some other sources, so we will we'll have a 90% share of clean and indigenous energy sources by 2030. So that will be contributing overall energy security of the country. That is showing the difference that how the various fuels, imported fuel, thermal fuels are going down by 2030, and renewable is picking the pace. Imported coal going down by 3%, RLNG by 15%. But if we look at hydropower, will be up by 12%. Wind 5% and solar 12%. So all the very clear shift from fossil fuel towards renewable energy sources. Further, overall capacity requirement 61 gigawatt, which is 64% more than as of the current installed capacity. And this is the electricity generation numbers. So in electricity generation, almost same pattern. The imported coal, imported coal per 20 coming down from 21, local 21 to 3%, and the gas 33 to 3%, whereas solar going up from hydropower going up by 30%, solar by 8%, and wind by from 3 to 8%. So electricity. The electricity generation from renewable is much more than from the fossil fuels.
Faisal, do you want to think about rounding off soon?
Yeah, okay. I'm closing in the next 5 minutes. So there, as we have discussed, that there's a number of strengths of the Pakistan electricity sector. Like there's a participation of large developers, technology giants, and equity partners, private sector participation. We have all kind of electricity generation mix in the power generation and transmission sector. All kind of fuels, starting from and thermal imported, and then to nature resources, hydro and wind. The carbon emissions are much lower, 356, and then we have a huge indigenous and renewable energy potential. Now we move towards the challenges, like achieving 60% targets. Absolute, of course, it's a challenge itself, and then because we are moving towards clean energy transition, market transformation, so we have to very carefully look at the impact of these transition on the risk and return on the investments. Currently, we are operating under long-term power purchase agreements and number of committed projects. So there's a very limited competition, a limited space for the competition on the capacity program for the next few years. And the current power purchase agreement model is operating on minimum take or pay. So then again, a very limited space for the competition on energy purchase price. Of course, we need huge investments in the generation and transmission sector. So we have to explore all the options. And then capacity building institution strengthening. Further, there's a circular debt in the whole value chain of electricity. So various mechanisms has been devised to cope up with these challenges. And the government is working on grid reinforcement and management through SCADA. We have prepared indicative generation capacity expansion plan carrying long-term demand and supply projections. And then various plans and policies are under formulation. Further, the capacity building of various organizations are going side by side to operate under new market dynamics. Risk identification processes have been streamlined. The distribution losses, theft control, various technologies like smart technologies have been introduced, smart meters and smart grids. Forecasting tools is planned to deployed for VRE technologies, and the country is moving towards has strong focus on distributed generation, the micro grid and mini grid in the remote areas. The regulations have been formulated to set up these grids to provide electricity to the remote area where the grid is not working. So conclusion, of course, it's overall, if you look, the climate change is shared global concern. So all need to work together, and Pakistan is committed, despite of all challenges, to move towards clean and green energy. The country required climate financing, technical and policy level support to make this transition successful. Renewable energy and level of energy efficiency have overall strong impact on SDG7 and NDC. And globally, of course, the actions are required based on the principle of rationality and the GHG shares, because some countries have more share in the GHG, whereas other countries, like developing countries, have very low share. But of course, if the world want to move them side by side, so they have to provide them the technical and policy level support. So that without compromising on their development need, they can contribute in building this green and eco-friendly worlds. Energy sector is most fighting and demanding. There's a number of opportunity on the side, whether it's environment, regulatory side, policy sides, and the same is with the career opportunities in the energy sector. So because that was not covered in my present, that is just going to highlight about the energy sector. So I am not going in detail. So that's all from my side. If you have any question, please feel free to ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Faisal. That was extremely interesting and very thorough. And I think there will be questions. Unfortunately, Laura has had to leave, but she has shared a paper on decarbonisation policy in Bangladesh, which she and her colleagues have analysed. You might find it interesting to compare, and she would like to perhaps follow up this conversation later. Given that there are few of us, we could just switch our cameras on and have a general discussion, if you like, rather than going via the chat. But I'll kick things off, if you like. To be a devil's advocate in a way, I'm wondering why there is still such faith in the benefits of unbundling and multi-actor markets, given there's so little evidence around the world of them leading to benefits, either to more efficient electrical systems or benefits to consumers, for example. It seems to me that most of the benefits go to investors who want to make money out of it. But for example, if you look at the history of the UK in the last 20 years, what we've seen is a distribution network that's crumbling and chronically underinvested. In Norway, for example, the unbundling has been catastrophic in terms of basically creating energy poverty where it didn't exist before, because the generators are more interested in playing the market than supplying electricity at a good value for consumers. So there's a lot of counter evidence for this as a process. I know that the World Bank has been pushing it very heavily for 20, 30 years. But why? What is the interest for Pakistan to go down this route?
Yeah, very interesting question. Yeah, actually, of course, both models have plus, minus, positive and negatives. In 90s, when Pakistan was under a monopoly model of WAPDA, Water and Power Development Authority, so there was issues of efficiency, governance, and even the capital formation, because with the increasing population, you need more energy and more electricity infrastructure. But somehow there were serious issues within the complete value chain, and you cannot find that actually where the issue is, because the generation and transmission, it was a giant department. So that was, of course, that was on the advice of World Bank, but that unburdening remained very successful, because, as I have told, that within a span of a few years, with through this unbundling, we added around 18,000 megawatts of power generation capacity, which otherwise through that model was not possible, because government was not in position to finance these projects, these capital intensive projects. So of course, the one reason was to enhance the capital formation, to bring the investment in the through private sector in on the generation sides, and other to improve the efficiency and the transparency. But then somehow we struck in the middle of the reforms, that we move away from the vertical integrated utility, but we could not move completely towards the open markets. We struck in the middle.
I understand. You've explained that in the presentation very clearly.
Yeah.
But when you argue that it leads to greater transparency, I mean, many people argue that it leads to less transparency, because all the contracts get tied up in commercial secrecy. So it's very difficult for a citizen, for example, to see, where the money's going, who's getting it, where the benefit's going, and so forth. So I know that that's the kind of mantra that people argue, that these are the benefits, but I'm not sure I've seen evidence that they're the benefits, and that's why I asked the question. Yes, I can see that the kind of, the other thing that's been said about this process by people like Christopher Gore, for example, talking about the process in Uganda, is that the World Bank pushed for things like unbundling before it had in place the safeguards that would ensure accountability and transparency and so forth. So, how do you actually create transparency in a private market? Because generally speaking, that's the first thing to go.
No, obviously, like the private market, you need a strong regulations. The private investor is there to invest and to earn return on his investments. So it's a regulation, that how you regulate the market. The more a strong regulator and a very robust regulations can control the windfall profits from the private sector, because the private sector obviously is not there for the charity purposes. So if an investor invests under certain conditions, under the certain risks, obviously the objective is to maximize the profit and gain the return. At that time, I think the country had no other options, because if we would not have moved towards the market liberalization, we might have stuck in the capacity shortfall. So we have to add the generation capacity, and that model, I think, remained successful. But obviously, there are a number of questions that on the social welfare side, that these ultimately the end consumers suffers. They could not get the true benefits, but the benefits was for the investors. On the other hand, if we hear investors, so they say there was an issue in the payment cycles, there was issue in the circular debt issues, so they could not get timely payments because again the cost of electricity was too high, that the government cannot pass on all the cost to the end consumer due to their socio-economic objectives. They have to inject subsidies, and due to delays in subsidies and due to non-receivables from the big consumers, you cannot pay timely to these IPPs. and they suffer on their lending side, they suffer on their return on equity side. So they say that they could not get the desired return, which was agreed return under the power purchase agreement. So both sides have different stories, but overall, they provided certain socio-economic benefits to the country as well, because all the economic development which we have today, these projects have contributed to supervision of affordable reliable electricity to the nation grids. We have the main
before you go on, let me see if anyone else has got a question so that we can open it up a little bit. Would anyone else like to put a question? Yeah, Douglas, go ahead.
Yeah, can I ask? I mean, it's part related to what we've been discussing, but it's coming at it from a more, I suppose, technological aspect. Being a physicist, I think about the sort of technology and so on. But as was mentioned in the chat, what is the role of distributed energy systems? And I suppose the question from me is, it seems to be a lot of emphasis on very large energy infrastructure. And I guess the question is, to what extent is that really appropriate given the context of your particular country and the considerable growth and lowering of cost of small-scale distributed energy systems, and to what extent might they play a role in the future energy system? And I suppose that's also partly linked to the discussion about the need for substantial amounts of financing, because those can be, I suppose, pump started or supported through different schemes at sort of local level rather than very large investments. So I mean, to what extent do you envisage that these distributed systems will play a significant role moving forward?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question, because we have 25% of the population that does not have access to the electricity, and the nation grid is not supplying electricity to those areas, those remote areas. So for the time being, we are targeting the community which is remotely located and a poor community. So government, the regulator, have just going to introduce microgrid regulations. So of course, this integrated energy solutions that from technology point of view, we are open. Like, it can be even a renewable energy source system, it can be a diesel generator, even for that purpose, because the first objective is to supply them the electricity to that major portion of the population. And then on the like economic viability sides, we are again looking for a private sector participation. So the private sector will be invited to set up microgrids and mini grids in those areas which are not being served by the relevant discos, where the network is not there. We are envisioning some benefits, socioeconomic benefits for them in terms of the supply of electricity, creating some business opportunities, and giving them some secondly, because by 2030 the national electricity policy is foreseeing the supply uniform access to electricity to all by 2030. So it's not possible for the government to expand the network within that time to supply electricity to each and every corner of the country. And that microgrids and that distributed energy system will not only supply them electricity, but that it'll also reduce the burden from the nation grid as well, which otherwise you have to invest in the nation grid. You have to build the projects in the long-term power purchase agreements. Then there's a capacity obligations. You have to pay them the fixed charges, regardless of the fact that you get energy or not. So there are some.
Just clarify. So, what's the mechanism for funding the distributed energy, the mini grids and so forth? I didn't quite.
Yeah, that will be a community-based project. So the developers of these microgrids or the distributed energy system will have direct agreement with the community. So the price will be decided between the developer and the community. Of course, they can be a franchise. They can be a community like some society. So they'll execute a bilateral contract with the developers, deciding on certain term and condition. on certain pricing. So, but of course, the regulator and the government will regulate the process to avoid any undue profits, undue exploitation of the market.
Thank you. Would any of the others like to ask a question? Mohammed, Ali, Abu, would you like to say anything? Yeah, go ahead. You're still muted. I think you need to still unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I.
All right. So first of all, I would like to say thank you to Mr. Sharif for this presentation. And I would also like to mention that I'm from Pakistan as well. And I'm studying in the same MSc program that he is. I'm also studying in new renewable energy.
Great to know.
Yeah, my question is this, that when we talk about the renewable energy potential of Pakistan, the conversation entirely is dominated by solar energy and how solar energy can play a part. My question to you is this, that does Pakistan, or is there any like say surveys going on in Pakistan for the potential there is available for offshore or onshore wind energy in Pakistan? I want to know this.
Yeah, yes, obviously, I think there's not much debate, much discussion on the offshore energy. Offshore energy is like I also it's my favorite offshore wind because when you complete your MSc from Durham, so they have a very strong focus UK on the offshore wind deployments. So obviously you get some interest in the offshore deployments. But unfortunately, at the moment, there's no much discussion on the offshore because still we are not exploit all the onshore potential. You know that current now has just 5% share of the renewable wind and solar, including around 2,000 megawatts of solar wind. Sorry, so there's a huge onshore potential. Secondly, on solar side, because on solar side there's also a scheme of net metering that you can install a rooftop solar and then you can export the surplus to the grid. So that's an easy deployment. So that's why more focus on the solar. But on the wind side, yes, the commercial projects on independent on IPP model have been set up, and we have planned to conduct international competitive bidding for wind and solar during next few months, and have targets of around 10,000 megawatts from wind and solar by 2030 to add more additional 10,000 megawatt by 2030. But offshore can be a discussion of future. Right now, there's no plan to explore to find the feasible sites for the offshore.
Thank you. That was very good. That was a good question. I'm going to have to round up now because it's coming up to 2 o'clock. I'd like to say thank you again. That was extremely interesting. I hope we'll be able to carry on these conversations. There are a lot of issues that will be great to discuss going forward. I'll just remind everyone that the next seminar on the 10th of February is Jeremy Schmidt from the Geography Department, who's going to talk about the role of state science in developing Alberta's oil sands. I think that's all I need to say. Lynn, have I forgotten anything? Okay, in that case, thank you very much. Thank you again, Faisal. We look forward to carrying on the conversation with you in the future. And thanks everyone for attending.